At the request of the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization, the United States Army Chemical Corps has developed a mask especially for civilian use. This mask protects the wearer against biological and chemical attack by purifying the air inhaled. Filter pads in the mask absorb toxic gases and screen out radioactive dust and particles carried in the air, particles which are called microbial organisms. The mask is comfortable, features good visibility and ease of breathing, and permits conversation with others. Using specially designed equipment, many tests were run to prove the mask and its individual components. A microbial aerosol, that is, a cloud of tiny organisms, is generated in the plastic sphere. A pump which simulates the human breathing cycle is attached to a mannequin. Laboratory results showed the mask's performance was excellent in filtering out microbial organisms from the air. However, to learn whether the mask might leak at the edges when being worn, additional tests were required with human beings. Fitting trials were then held with children as the subjects. The mask will be made in 6 different sizes to fit all persons from young children to adult men and women. For very young children, a tent-like infant protector has been developed. Volunteer children from the families of servicemen are participating in the test with the consent of their parents. To allay any distrust in the minds of the children, the speaker, in explaining the test to be made, points out that there is nothing either risky or unusual about wearing a mask. Masks are worn wherever the air may be impure, by firemen in smoke-filled buildings, by farmers spraying crops, by painters, miners, and many others. The first step in the test is to measure the faces of the group so that proper sizes of masks can be selected. Masks of the indicated sizes are chosen and fitted, and the head straps adjusted. Next, using a bottle of banana oil, a general check for fit is made. If this highly fragrant chemical cannot be smelled, it means the mask is fitting snugly. Ordinarily, the banana oil test is adequate. However, a more thorough test in a room filled with harmless microbial organisms will be necessary before official acceptance of the mask for quantity production. A record is made of the proper size mask for each participant. Before the masks are put on, a sampler containing a filter material is sealed over the mouth and nose to pick up any of the harmless microbial organisms which might leak through the mask. The filter material will be analyzed after the test. If only a few organisms are found, a proper fit is assured. Participants enter the room through doors which seal it off from the rest of the laboratory. The fine aerosol spray is released into the test chamber. During the 10-minute exposure period, the atmosphere was filled with a large quantity of organisms, a concentration much greater than could be reasonably expected during any biological attack. This high concentration was used to make it easier to detect any possible mask leakage. Following exposure in the chamber, the group exits and the masks are removed. The filter samplers are collected for laboratory assay to determine how many organisms had penetrated the mask. Results indicated that a satisfactory fit had been obtained for each of the volunteers and that the 6 mask sizes would meet all civilian needs for defense. As all sizes effectively screened out the test organisms, the masks prove they are a thorough protection for men, women, and children. The masks will cost no more than several dollars.
The Arctic igloo, proverbial home of the Eskimo. Today, for the armed forces, it can be a practical field shelter in the Arctic. North of the tree line, on the polar ice cap, or in the mountains. Shelters like these are no match for the hazards of gale winds and violent blizzards encountered in the Arctic. But the igloo takes conditions like these in its stride. With the igloo a structure of increasing concern in Arctic warfare research, 3 men of the 1st Arctic Test Detachment set out on a demonstration of the simple steps involved in building this serviceable and technically desirable snow house. Only a particular kind of snow, wind-driven and of uniform consistency, can be used for igloos. And if it is unavailable, it's useless to build one. Knife tests reveal whether or not the drift is of the hard-packed consistency that is the only kind suitable for building an igloo. This snow is eminently suitable. So a rectangle is traced and the snow chopped up to make digging possible. A snowshoe takes the place of a shovel. With more elaborate equipment, work can be speeded up, but 3 men using merely this equipment can build one of these far north shelters in about 3 hours. With a 2-foot pit scooped out, the most delicate operation of Operation Igloo gets underway. Cutting the blocks of snow requires care and patience. In spite of the solid texture of hard-packed Arctic snow, the blocks will crack if too great pressure is applied. For best results, the block should be about 5 inches thick, 30 by 17 inches. An ordinary carpenter's wood saw is ideal for cutting, but even the more tiring knife method works well enough. At the end of the pit, a little trench is cut to make it easy to cut the block from underneath. Then the block is freed at the top. According to their size and the density of the snow, blocks weigh anywhere from 35 to 50 pounds. Careful handling is always a #1 consideration. Though the blocks are remarkably strong, they may break when held in certain positions and jerked suddenly. Blocks are trimmed down into symmetrical slabs to aid in solid construction. There's a common misconception that igloos are made of ice. Nothing to it. Sometimes the going gets a little rugged. On occasions like this, a derrick wouldn't be unwelcome. But you don't often find derricks wandering around loose in this part of the country. While one of the men continues to trim the slabs cut by the man in the pit, our 3rd man finds another spot to cut out still more blocks and thus speed up the construction job. Days are short in the Arctic, no daylight to waste. Back at the main site of operations, work has moved ahead. The pit from which the blocks come will later serve as the interior of the completed igloo. A T-shaped cellar begins to emerge. Now, with a circle traced in the snow as a guide to the igloo's shape, the first 2 blocks are worked into position. The entire construction of an igloo is based on the principle of the Roman arch. Blocks are trimmed so that they fit against each other at an angle. One block leans against another so that they give each other support. Chinks are filled in with soft snow. But this must be done gently because the wall won't be firm and solid until the whole dome is complete. With the first row completed, a new technique comes into play. Several feet from where the igloo's door is to be, several blocks are sliced down diagonally, creating a triangular-shaped niche. Note the short, choppy strokes of the blade. The blocks to be fitted in for the second tier thus rise in a spiral. As in the case of each succeeding tier, the blocks lean in more sharply than in the case of the one below. If you ever go in for building an igloo, never place the blocks seam on seam. Lay them the way a bricklayer does. There's no change in method from here on. And if the blocks are carefully set and the snow is of passable quality, there'll be no trouble with a cave-in. Now the igloo is 3/4 completed, and this is the time for cutting the door, which resembles, like the doors of most igloos, the entrance to an oversized doghouse. Entering an igloo in a walking position is not recommended. Inside, one of the men adjusts the blocks that will complete the dome. The cottage is nearly ready now for putting out the welcome mat. Now the last block goes on. The belief that water is poured over igloos has no basis in fact. The self-insulating qualities of the snow take care of everything, for snow inherently keeps out the cold and holds in warmth. Final touches. In a little less than 3 hours, a country place of their own. The cost of materials, just like the weather, is zero. It's not only a first-rate and comfortable shelter, but a shelter that will still be here the next morning. Unlike a tent, no gale winds or blizzards can move it from its present location. Blending with the landscape, it's self-camouflaging, and it can be left behind for others without abandoning government equipment. One of the men leaves a block outside, which, if necessary, serves as a door. But with the door open and a small hole cut in the dome, ventilation and temperature inside can be regulated. Just 3 knives and 3 hours' work. Know a faster way to build a house? And with the place inhabited, it soon warms up even with the door open. There's plenty of light, too. The dome of snow resembles a huge cluster of diamonds, with each facet reflecting light. A candle after dark creates plenty of illumination. Already, it's begun to warm up. Our igloo builders are ready for rest, and it's ready for them. They're set for a warm and comfortable sleep, come blizzards, winds, or a sub-zero thermometer. Next morning, everyone's blood is still circulating, and the igloo has fused overnight into a surprisingly solid unit capable of supporting a great deal of weight. For the benefit of skeptics, the men give proof positive of just how much an igloo can take. With today's emphasis on the polar regions, the art of constructing an igloo may be a very good thing to know if you ever find yourself in the Arctic. Safe, sturdy, and strong, the Arctic igloo very definitely holds its own.
500,000 pounds of it, gushing from rocket nozzles that rise, slowly at first, from a launch complex at the Cape. It is the power of America. Knowledge, skill, energy, and imagination from every corner of this nation pool for this thrust into space. In July of 1950, American rocket pioneers at Cape Canaveral launch Bumper, a captured German V-2 with an Army-developed second stage. More than 1,400 missile and space vehicles have since roared skyward from the Cape. Some have probed deep into the secrets of the solar system, past the moon, past Venus, around the sun. On this proving ground today, foundations of national goals in space stand in concrete and steel. The challenge in space is infinite, but our nation's goals are immediate and critical. America's leadership on Earth demands leadership in space. The job is not easy. Witness this launch of a Titan II. In the test arena, engineers subject all systems to the most exacting laboratory conditions. The missile is destroyed. All tests, including this disappointing failure, contribute vital knowledge for the greater reliability of this weapon. Now, the Martin-built Air Force Titan II is the big stick of American leadership. Its 6,000-pound warhead can be hurled 1/3 of the way around the globe with pinpoint accuracy. This flight was a milestone. Long-range cameras record staging. The same phenomena is shown from space by cameras mounted on the second stage. Shown 33 times slower than it actually happens, the booster is blasted away at second stage ignition. This is the view that the Gemini pilots will have as they rocket into orbit. Seemingly motionless, the second stage is fast approaching speeds beyond 15,000 miles an hour. Station after station down the Atlantic missile range tracks the missile's flight and records telemetry data on its performance. Where there are no islands, range instrumentation ships like the H.H. Arnold fill the gap. Target zone is near Ascension Island, more than 5,000 miles from the Cape. 30 minutes after launch, the huge nose cone is there. Here is a sight few men have seen. A re-entry vehicle making its fiery plunge from space back through the atmosphere. Designed to withstand the superheating caused by air friction, Titan's nose cone survives to land squarely on target. As the flight ends, the job of compiling the test reports begin. Speed is vital. Some data cassettes are picked up on the fly by range aircraft, making information available to engineers in hours instead of days. The new parameters of missile and space operations are measured in microseconds and millimeters instead of minutes and miles. Back at Patrick Air Force Base, headquarters for the Atlantic Missile Range, flight information is already being checked. It shows this Titan's performance to be nearly perfect. This is good news to more than weapon system people, for Titan is earmarked to boost the two-man Gemini spacecraft into orbit. To Lieutenant Colonel John G. Albert on Gemini Pad 19, this flight had special significance. Colonel Albert is chief of the Gemini Launch Division, 6555th Aerospace Test Wing. Now, certain booster modifications to man-rate the Titan have proven flight-worthy. Colonel Albert checks the Titan, which will boost the first unmanned Gemini capsule into space early in 1964. From the blockhouse, he will direct all launches in the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Gemini program. Still, another version of the Titan II will be the core of the giant Titan III space booster. With big, solid fuel rockets strapped on either side of the liquid fuel core, Titan III will generate more than 1 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Titan III will put enormous payloads into orbit. Launch facilities for this fast-reacting giant booster are under construction. Atlas, like Titan, plays a variety of roles. Atlas, built by General Dynamics, was the first operational intercontinental ballistic missile on duty with SAC. For NASA, it powered the Ranger moon probes, the Mariner flight to Venus, and the orbital flights of Project Mercury. Air Force crewmen need all their technical competence to prepare this complex system for flight. This Atlas being prepared for launch by airmen of the 6555th Aerospace Test Wing seeks both military competence and scientific truth. Passenger pods attached to the side of the Atlas carry a variety of experiments for basic research in the space environment. On the tip of this 90-foot tower of steel is a completely new type of nose cone designed to increase the effectiveness of this system.
1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
300,000 parts functioned perfectly when the Atlas roared to life, living up to its reputation for dependability. Atlas and Titan are formidable weapons, but an indestructible intercontinental missile with a quick reaction time was needed. Minuteman, the solid fuel, instant ICBM that is fired from concrete underground silos, was the answer. By mid-year, Boeing was delivering Minutemen to SAC squadrons at the rate of 1 a day, and at the Cape, missile men were already at work on an advanced version of America's Sunday Punch. This early flight ended with an explosion that was visible for miles. Yet, even from such a brief flight, great quantities of information are gathered from telemetry sources. Resulting changes and improvements will soon have the advanced Minuteman as reliable as the earlier models now operational with the Strategic Air Command. This November test, employing an entirely new second stage, streaked more than 5,000 miles down the Atlantic missile range to score a strike. The Navy's new extended-range Polaris also experienced some difficulties in achieving its full 2,500-mile range. By October, design changes had so improved reliability of the new bird that it was considered ready for the acid test, launch from a submarine. Every missile-firing submarine comes to the Cape for a shakedown cruise, which includes the launch of a production model Polaris. The USS Andrew Jackson was chosen to fire the first new model Polaris. Loaded with the Lockheed Corporation's new Polaris, the Andrew Jackson cruised a few miles off the coast of Cape Canaveral and submerged. Then, in a froth of bubbles, the bullet-shaped missile surfaced, ignited, and sped away downrange. The Army completed development testing of their selective range Pershing with a demonstration of how this new tactical weapon earned the nickname Shoot and Scoop. Men from the Army's 2nd Missile Battalion of the 44th Artillery conducted this test under simulated operational conditions. The mobile launcher and support equipment, mounted on half-tracks, first made a grueling trek through rough Canaveral scrubland. Upon reaching the firing site, the rugged combat soldiers demonstrated their newly acquired technical skills by assembling the Pershing. Moving through the simplified countdown, the crew erected and checked out this new addition to the Army arsenal. The sharpshooting missileers hit the bullseye, proving to the watching Army Artillery Board that both men and missile were ready. Pershing, built by the Martin Company, will be with units in the field in early 1964. Another final chapter was written on the Atlantic Missile Range with the last research and development test of the Hound Dog. Nestled under the wing of a B-52, the air-to-ground Hound Dog drops from the mothership and streaks to its target 500 miles downrange. The Air Force Mace has been a sentinel on the outpost of freedom for years. Selected crews for this tactical weapon are brought to the Cape for system checkout and for launch training. In hardened, protected sites overseas, Mace crews are ready and waiting should their missiles ever have to come alive. This is ASSET, the first winged spacecraft and virtually a flying laboratory. ASSET, short for Aerothermodynamic Elastic Structural Systems Environmental Test, was designed to attack a full spectrum of basic research problems relating to reentry from space. Its findings will be applied to current programs and will increase options for designers working on future space hardware. In its 22-minute non-orbiting flight, it transmitted volumes of information over 137 telemetry channels. An Air Force Thor retired from overseas service with NATO sent ASSET on its successful flight. Thor, built by Douglas Aircraft Company, has launched more payloads into space than all other boosters combined. NASA uses the Thor Delta for a wide range of space projects. In May, a Delta orbited Telstar 2. Seventh in the series of Tyros weather satellites, was orbited in June. In July, SYNCOM, a new communication satellite, was placed in a difficult synchronous orbit 23,000 miles up. This perfect operation has led to plans for placing another SYNCOM, boosted by a Super Thor Delta, into orbit at the intersection of the equator and international dateline. Hovering over this spot, the Hughes-built SYNCOM will link Asia with North America for worldwide television transmission. Radio communicators for years have been plagued by the peculiarities of the ionosphere, a globe-circling band of electrically charged particles. Scientists from the Cambridge laboratories designed a 50-pound device to take the measure of this ion band. The Air Force Blue Scout was selected to send this payload 8,000 miles into space. The Blue Scout crew assembled this off-the-shelf booster and fitted its delicate payload in place. The Blue Scout is aimed at its target in space, much like a rifle, and spin motors maintain flight stability. Project officials announced the results of the probe were excellent. But not all of the rockets reaching into the secrets of space from the Cape are giants like Titan, Atlas, and Thor. Each year, nearly 300 smaller rockets are used in scientific studies of near space. The Robin is a weather rocket used for investigation in the upper atmosphere. Air samples, high-altitude winds, and temperatures gathered by the Robin complement information from traditional meteorological research and, like the findings of the Tyros satellite, is available to all the world. This sleek-looking Nike Cajun is equipped to measure radiation. Along with high-altitude aircraft, Nike Cajun is used in a joint United States, Great Britain, and Canadian radiation detection program. The Nike Smoke is used in studies of wind shear. Photographs of its smoke trail reveal the strength and drift of wind currents at various layers of the atmosphere. This information is valuable in planning, guidance, and in determining the structural strength necessary for large space boosters. Yet no mechanism, however wonderfully wrought by the hands of men, can substitute for man himself. A machine can be built to stand more heat, more cold, and perhaps take up less space. But engineers cannot fashion something as dexterous as the hand, as perceptive as the eye, nor can they make a brain with curiosity, imagination, and courage. Air Force Major L. Gordon Cooper confirmed all of this in the last and longest of the Mercury flights. The suiting up, the pre-dawn ride to Pad 14, the well-wishing, the squeeze into the capsule, and the long countdown wait has become a familiar ritual. But then the count reaches its final moments. Ignition. Liftoff. And a man is riding a flaming pillar of power. The only calm man present is Major Cooper, who remarks, "What an afterburner." But Major Cooper can scarcely be counted among the present any longer. He has left the Cape and the world below, and in 5 minutes will be going more than 17,000 miles per hour. He will be in orbit. More than 700 members of the press gaze at the diminishing speck in the sky. The news is trumpeted worldwide in a matter of seconds. Europe watches Major Cooper's launch live via Telstar. Major General Leighton I. Davis, commander of the Atlantic Missile Range, directs the 18,000 people of the Department of Defense who are committed to the support of Project Mercury. In the 19th orbit of Major Cooper's 22-orbit flight, the failure of an electrical relay eliminated his autopilot and attitude indicators. Without the astronaut, the mission would have ended here in failure. Ground controls could not have retrieved the spacecraft from orbit. Major Cooper fired the retro rockets and, using the window for attitude reference, manually controlled the spacecraft during re-entry. The landing was perfect, emphasizing the fact that the most important system in space is man himself. Major Cooper elected to wait in his spacecraft for retrieval by the nearby USS Kearsarge. The band on board strikes up the Air Force song as Major Cooper emerges wearily from Faith 7 and responds with a grin and a salute. Before his flight, Major Cooper, along with other Air Force astronauts and space pilots, attended a traditional Air Force dining-in at the Officers Club at Patrick Air Force Base, Florida. Secretary of the Air Force Eugene M. Zuckert stated the need for our efforts in space.
We believe that space can be free to all for peaceful activity only if somebody keeps it free. We are that somebody.
Project Mercury scouted the frontier of space. Project Gemini will make further explorations, but much more power is needed to make the trip to the moon. NASA's Saturn, the booster for the Apollo program, will furnish this power. Standing 168 feet tall, this rocket dwarfs the people preparing it for launch. 3 previous tests of the 8-engine booster have been completely successful. Primary objective of this test was to check booster performance with 1 engine shut down in flight. This flight, too, was successful. On November the 16th, 1963, Air Force One touched down at the Cape Skid Strip, bringing President Kennedy on his 3rd visit to America's spaceport. He was welcomed by Major General Leighton I. Davis, commander of the Air Force Missile Test Center, NASA Administrator James Webb, and NASA Launch Operations Center Director Kurt Debus. The president moved out quickly on his whirlwind tour, stopping outside the Saturn blockhouse on Complex 37 for a Project Gemini briefing by Air Force astronauts Cooper and Grissom. After another briefing inside the blockhouse on Project Apollo, the president and his party, which included Florida's Senator Smathers, drove to the base of the giant Saturn. Saturn will carry an American crew to the moon in this decade, a goal established by the young president shortly after he took office in 1961. The president then boarded a nearby helicopter for an aerial tour of the space launch areas and a 30-mile flight to the USS Observation Island. The commander-in-chief was piped aboard. Donning a sailor's jacket, he looked every inch the naval officer he was during World War II. The fleet performed flawlessly, and President Kennedy saw his first Cape missile launch, a Polaris, from the submerged nuclear submarine, the Andrew Jackson. A proud commander congratulated a proud crew. The president returned to the Cape by helicopter. His visit expressed his continuing support for the nation's space program. President Kennedy bids his farewells. On November 25th, the Cape was closed. Officers and men of the Air Force Missile Test Center assembled for memorial services. Brigadier General Harry J. Sands, Jr., the center vice commander, spoke.
He moved among us with warmth and interest and awareness of our efforts. It is well to remember that we are assembled here today not because of the shocking way that he died, but because of and in tribute to the way he lived. We salute the memory of our late president, John F. Kennedy, and salute as well, in token of our steadfast devotion to duty, the new president and commander-in-chief, Lyndon B. Johnson.
Demonstrating a determination to move forward toward the goals established under the late president, Cape workers the next night launched an interplanetary monitoring platform. It was the 21st straight success for the Thor Delta. NASA underlined this determination the next day, successfully launching the Atlas Centaur. The entire Centaur upper stage was placed in orbit. On Thanksgiving Day, President Lyndon Johnson announced the Cape would trade one world-famous name for another. Cape Canaveral will hereinafter be known as Cape Kennedy.
Flamethrowers are designed to project a stream of fuel which is ignited upon leaving the nozzle of the gun. Liquid fuel sprays out, producing a wide, bushy flame with black smoke. On its flight to the target, a great deal of the liquid fuel is burned up. Fuels treated with a thickener called napalm produce narrower flames. The thicker the fuel, the narrower the flame. Under the same conditions, thin napalm fuel produces a much wider flame than thickened fuel and burns for only a few seconds on the target. Thickening fuel greatly increases the range. It is jelly-like in substance, clings to and burns in or on the target, sometimes for as long as 6 minutes. If locations of small openings in the target are known, thickened fuel can be spotted by accurate aiming so that it will enter the openings. While it does not billow around openings like liquid fuel, thickened fuel strikes the target with force enough to ricochet inside and cling to personnel and objects it strikes while burning. Thickened fuels consist of a fuel thickener, known as napalm, mixed with gasoline or a light fuel oil gas mixture. The thickener comes in airtight cans containing 5¼ pounds of the material. One of the most widely used mixtures is 1 can of thickener added to 20 US gallons of gasoline, or a fuel oil gas mix, and stirred vigorously. Generally, a dry, open-head 55-gallon drum and improvised wooden paddle are used. Galvanized containers must never be used because of chemical reaction which may break down the fuel. This 4.2% mix is generally preferred. To determine whether the mix has been sufficiently stirred, lift the paddle. If it runs off, it needs more stirring. If it drips off and leaves only an adhering film, it is sufficiently stirred, providing there is no settling of particles. Newly mixed fuel has the appearance of tapioca pudding and is readily pourable. It may be fired even 1 hour after mixing. However, preferably it should be stored at least overnight in a closed container. In preparing mixtures, temperature is an important factor. Thickener will react faster at high temperatures, which means less stirring time is required. If the temperature is below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it is desirable to prepare thickened fuel indoors in a heated room, which will reduce the stir time considerably. A correctly stirred mix shows no settling of particles. Aged fuel takes on the appearance of an even jelly, which is stringy. Aging has more effect on low percentage than high percentage mixtures. There is no appreciable change in concentrations greater than 6%. For demonstration, this man is dipping his hand into the fuel. But don't make a habit of it. Leaded gasoline is toxic. Aged fuel looks like smooth jelly. Peptizing fuel at any temperature combines the advantages of thickened and unthickened fuel. It's pourable, stable. Range of thickened fuel with a wider flame. For portable flamethrowers, 2 tablespoonfuls of water mixed with 1 can of powder before adding to 20 gallons of liquid are suggested. After standing, this mix can be transferred without pressure. Here you can get a good idea of the different consistencies arrived at as a result of varying the amount of thickener. By increasing the amount of thickener from 2 to 6%, a wide range of fuels can be obtained. This is a 2% mix. This and the following demonstrations are a comparison of various mixes. Here is a 2% mix being fired. Note that it has quite a wide flame and a maximum range of about 35 yards. This is a 6% mix. Note that this mixture produces a very narrow, rod-like flame with a maximum range of about 50 yards.
This is a 4% unpeptized mix. This mix produces a flame not quite as narrow as the 6% mix. Its maximum range is approximately 45 yards. Aging has an effect on thickened fuels. Low concentrations have a tendency to decrease in viscosity. Here's a 3% mix 1 day after preparation. In performance, note that it produces a fairly narrow flame for a maximum range of about 45 yards. Here is the same fuel 2 weeks after mixing. Note that the flame is wider and the range is much shorter. To get the best results from thickened fuels, watch your stir time. Keep all your equipment and material clean and dry. Age your fuel except in emergencies. And test fire before going into action.
What's it like in Germany?
Must be terrible.
Well, they asked for it, they got it.
Yes, but you can't let them starve.
I don't know about that. I got a son out there. As far as I can see, it'd be a good thing if some of them did die.
Well, a lot of Germany is dead. Our last bombing was directed against their communications, against convoys, trains, road and rail bridges, against goods yards, stations, viaducts. We not only smashed up the towns, but smashed up the links between the towns. And at the finish, life in Germany just ran down like a clock. Place and time meant nothing, because the people, the links between the people were smashed too. They were just left wandering, searching, looking for food, looking for their homes, looking for each other.
Ich suche meine Frau.
Ich suche meinen Mann.
Ich suche Frieda Windler, geborene Jonoscheid, Königsberg.
Ich suche meine Frau, Elfriede Schulz, und Tochter Christa.
Achtung! Stalingrad-Kämpfer. Wer kennt den Sanitätsunteroffizier Heinz Kuhlmann? Feldpost Nummer...
There are 70 million people in Germany, and about 30 million of them are looking for someone, or are lost and lie looking without seeing, like the eyes of a dead rabbit. They are still stunned by what hit them, stunned by the war they started. But in the search for food and the urge to get home, the life force is beginning to stir again. Today, our powers of destruction are terrifying, but the will to live is still stronger. That's why we can't wash our hands of the Germans, because we can't afford to let that new life flow in any direction it wants. Our military government, that is, your husbands and sons, have to prod the Germans into putting their house in order. Why? We have an interest in Germany that is purely selfish. We cannot live next to a disease-ridden neighbor. And we must prevent not only starvation and epidemics, but also diseases of the mind, new brands of fascism from springing up. What is more, we have to persuade the Germans to do this themselves. First of all, the material patching up. meantime do they live? Yes, all looks lifeless. But underneath the rubble, there are people living in the cellars. The smoke from the cooking stoves drifts up from the ruins to the open third story where people are living too. Many in the big towns living without light, without coal, without water, without soap, living in the stench of corpses and sewerage, but still with the will to live. But the one thing on which all reconstruction depends is coal. Without coal, there can be no power and no transport. In Essen, our coal control has taken over the Krupp family mansion as its headquarters. And from here, we organize the output and distribution from the whole Ruhr coal fields. Last summer, what was called Operation Coal Scuttle brought 30,000 miners back from the Wehrmacht. But today, the great problem is moving the coal from the pithead to the liberated countries, to the German power plants and to the Allied military dumps. For the Germans themselves, there is no coal. They must go out in the woods and parks to cut wood, to strip the bark off the trees, to collect brushwood and carry it home in hand carts and prams. We say the great problem. But in Germany today, for military government officers, there is no such thing as a single problem. For example, the liberated countries won't get this coal unless there is transport to carry it. The transport cannot move any distance unless the tracks and the bridges have been repaired. They can't be repaired without steel, and the steel cannot be made without coal. There are some 17 newspapers published in the British zone. They all carry advertisements asking for the whereabouts of relatives. At Hamburg, there is a British-run postal search station indexing inquiries coming in at the rate of 50,000 a day. But when someone contacts their relatives, they must get a permit before they can travel by train. Hordes of cyclists and pedestrians and horse-drawn trucks wait to cross the pontoon and Bailey bridges built by our engineers. Wait to cross after military government traffic. And all this has to be supervised by our sergeants and our MPs.
Achtung, Achtung! Attention, attention! Der Personenzug nach Hannover, 11:50 Uhr. Train now coming in is 11:50 for Hannover. Bahnsteig 7. Bielefeld, Minden, Hamm, Dortmund, 12:25 Uhr. Das Fahren auf den Ufern ist verboten. It is forbidden to ride on the buffers. Warten bis der Zug hält. Wait until the train stops. Fahren auf den Ufern ist verboten. It is absolutely forbidden to ride on the buffers.
Abfahrt Lüneburg und alle Stationen nach hier, 12:49 Uhr. The 12:49 train for Lüneburg and all stations to Kiel is about to leave.
From his beloved second home at Warm Springs, Georgia, the body of Franklin Delano Roosevelt moves on the first stages of its journey to his final resting place. Scores of sufferers from infantile paralysis sorrowfully bid farewell to their great friend and benefactor. The president's dog follows his beloved master. Aboard a special train beginning the 24-hour trip back to Washington, the 31st President of the United States leaves Warm Springs forever. And all
along the 700-mile route, people gather to honor President Roosevelt and his ideals. Slowly, the train backs into Union Station in the United States Capitol, awaited by a military guard of honor and members of the late great Chief Executive's family. With Justice Burns and Secretary Wallace, President Harry S. Truman heads the assemblage of the nation's leaders. On a 6-horse field artillery caisson, escorted by representatives of every branch of the nation's armed forces, the casket passes grief-stricken throngs of people en route from the station to the White House. Warplanes pay a final tribute to the fallen commander-in-chief, and officers and men of the mighty armed forces which he led march in slow, measured tread in Franklin Roosevelt's honor. Across from the White House in Lafayette Park, the men, women, and children whom Franklin Roosevelt served so well watch in tearful silence. Just before the brief private White House rites, President Roosevelt's casket rests in the historic East Room. Here, 80 years before, lay Abraham Lincoln. Now, home again, to the garden of his family home in Hyde Park, New York, comes President Roosevelt. Here in the old and lovely Hudson River estate, which several years ago he bequeathed to the people of the United States, the mortal remains of a man whose career has known no parallel in our time, will rest forever. And the world mourn with Mrs. Roosevelt and her family. S. Truman, President of the United States. Distinguished Senator from the state of Missouri for 10 years and Vice President since the last national election, Mr. Truman brings to his new high office an understanding of the gigantic American war effort, second only to that of the late President Roosevelt. Climaxing a long record of senatorial leadership, as chief of the famous Truman Committee on War Production, his work was a vital factor in the vast Allied war effort. At last summer's Democratic National Convention, Harry Truman was chosen as candidate for vice president with President Roosevelt. His brilliant record, hailed at the convention, included leadership in legislation for the reciprocal tariff, for the Selective Service Act, for Lend-Lease, and the repeal of the Neutrality Act. In 1935, he had voted for the World Court, and he had consistently given support to the progressive social program of the Roosevelt administration. Returning to Washington with Mr. Roosevelt, Harry Truman was now the Vice President-elect. In his first speech after his inauguration, Vice President Truman said, "In this shrinking world, no nation can live safely alone. Peace-loving nations must band together for the preservation of human progress." As President Roosevelt's second in command, these words expressed the American program. Franklin Roosevelt, born to wealth, and Harry Truman, one-time farm boy, were firmly united on that and every other major world aim. As the nation is plunged into mourning by President Roosevelt's death, Harry S. Truman becomes president, the seventh American vice president to assume the office under similar circumstances. President Truman takes over his duties. He announces that the San Francisco conference will go ahead as scheduled, and immediately receives the nation's military leaders, War Secretary Stimson, Army Chief of Staff Marshall, and Fleet Admiral King. James F. Burns, high Roosevelt aide who took part in the Crimea Conference, Secretary of State Stettinius, British Foreign Secretary Eden, and Ambassador Halifax also visit the President. Arriving to address a joint session of the Congress, President Truman receives thunderous applause. He pledges to carry forward the work of Franklin Roosevelt.
With great humility, I call upon all Americans to help me keep our nation united in defense of those ideals which have been so eloquently proclaimed by Franklin Roosevelt. I want in turn to assure my fellow Americans and all of those who love peace and liberty throughout the world that I will support and defend those ideals with all my strength and all my heart. So that there can be no possible misunderstanding, both Germany and Japan can be certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that America will continue the fight for freedom until no vestige of resistance remains. Our demand has been, and it remains, unconditional surrender. We will face the problems of peace with the same courage that we have faced and mastered the problems of war. In the memory of those who have made the supreme sacrifice, in the memory of our fallen president, we shall not fail.
It is in this press room, at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, where the postage stamps are printed, gummed, and inked. Here we see the two 400 subject rotary presses, turning out the 1 and 3 cent stamps of the regular series. Each of these two printing presses has a maximum production capacity of 3 million stamps a day, printed and gummed. Close-up of one of the presses, showing the stamps rolling off in blocks of 400. Next comes the inking of the stamps, which follows immediately after the printing and gumming process. Here we see the stamps being sorted, counted, and prepared for distribution. It is here that the imperfect issues are removed from stock before the completion of the preliminary packing work. From the sorting table, the stamps are sent to the packing and shipping division, where they are wrapped, sealed, and prepared for shipment to the 45,000 post offices throughout the United States. The sale of the postage stamp through the post office stamp window. Stamp sales of this kind during the last fiscal year totaled more than $400 million. Here we see the stamp being affixed to the envelope and its deposit in the mail slot. Next come the canceling machines, to the rear of which may be seen the pickup table, from which the mail is sent along on a belt arrangement to the stacker, and from the stacker into the canceling machine where it is postmarked. A close-up of a canceling machine in operation. This particular canceling machine has a capacity of 600 letters per minute. The shipment of the bundle mail pouches from the post office to the railroad or airmail terminal, as the case may be. The truck shown here is one of the 8,200 government-owned trucks now being operated by the Post Office Department's Motor Vehicle Service. Here we see the interior of a railway mail post office, showing a full crew at work. Here the mail is sorted by states and cities for dispatch en route. Close-up of the letter distribution in the letter case compartment at the